And this was, so the reason I use globalizing and not global or globalized is because I want to stress that the certain processes that we want to understand were only emerging right now. So it's not a fully fledged, fully developed system. It's something that is emerging, right? So you could think of the 16th century as this infancy in this stage of globalization. So this was definitely not the kind of globalization that we are familiar with of the last 2 centuries of steam engines, aeroplanes, container ships, to name a few. But it was a slower process, and I also want to highlight that it was a slower process, a process that was fraught with many undesirable things, and powered by sail, wind, and pack animals. So essentially the 16th century was not necessarily a march to modernity. There wasn't anything predestined in what we will learn about today, right? The pitfalls, the false starts, and it seemed that, and let's say history just trudged along, right? And it took a long time, just to give you a sense of how long it took. So a trip from Lisbon to Goa took about 6 months, and assuming that there wasn't any shipwreck or the winds, and assuming all the winds were favorable all the time, so it took 6 months just to come from Lisbon to Goa. And a return trip, which would also include other stops, say in Southeast Asia, would take about two years. If you'd set up from Lisbon today, you would return, if no accidents happened, 2 years later. So it took a long time, right? And the other thing is that while there is this huge movement of people and commodities, and largely a movement of people from Europe to other parts of the world, the reverse was not true, right? So people from Asia did not travel to Europe, people from Asia did not travel to Latin America, for instance, right? Except in these cases of, let's say, post-migration, like the Atlantic slavery, for instance, where I think the estimate is about 2 million people over 200 years. And in the 19th century, you had indentured labor, especially from India, that was taken from India to the Caribbean and other parts. So, barring these exceptions, you don't see an equal exchange of people. So I just wanted to flag that as well. And this is another reason why I think it's important to think of this time as globalizing, as something that is happening. And so this coming together, this interconnections in the world is what we term as early modernity. Now, of course, when we say early modernity, one presumes that, or one anticipates a move towards modernity. Now, this is a category that historians have created to explain these changes, right? I don't think those people saw themselves as early moderns. I don't think they called themselves as early moderns. But this is something that helps us think about these changes. Think about what happened and make sense of it, and then communicate it to a certain audience as well. And the early modernity in India was a result of 2 streams of history. At least that's how I think we could look at it. One obviously was the oceanic one, as I spoke about it, and I think it's fairly well known. And this was again the processes that were set after Vasco da Gama's voyages and the other later voyages. But there was another migration, an older migration, or older movement of humans. That was the overland movement, and that was a movement of tribes from Central Asia, right? So about 1000 AD, these tribes start moving west and southwest. One of the results of this migration is leads to the formation of the Ottoman Empire, for instance, and the other one of the many leads to the formation of the Delhi Sultanate in the 12th century, right? And I want to follow that link of the Delhi Sultanate, because what happens is over the next 2 centuries, the Delhi Sultanate starts expanding down south, And the moment it starts expanding, it also starts splintering. So by the time it's the 15th century, you have more sultanates, smaller regional sultanates that emerge in the Deccan. So regions that surround Goa, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and so on. And here you have, for instance, the Bahmani Sultanate or the Bijapuri Sultanate that I think is it's directly relevant to the history of Goa, right? So these were essentially Turkic-speaking nomads, right, who settled into Hindustan. And what I want to stress is that they introduced into the territory Persian imperial traditions and Persian as a totally language. So they combined these Persianate forms with some Turkic forms, some Mongol forms, some Iranian forms, especially of administration and particularly of land administration. So what they would do is parcel out chunks of land to military commanders in exchange for their military support and loyalty, right? And this was the administrative system that was combined with what was earlier existing in the early medieval times, let's say. So some form of Gupta administration, maybe the Palas in Bengal, closer home the Vijayanagara administration, and their feudatories, the Kirinaikas. So the Sultanate rule essentially combined these while or incorporated these into their Persian forms of administration, right? So and as such, Goa lies at the crossroads of these two streams of history, right? So the oceanic one and the overland one, the older overland one, brought in by the Central Asian warrior nomads, right? And so by the time it's 1460s, the port of Goa is captured by the Bahmanis, and a few decades later, it is then captured by the Bijapuris, right? And by the 1490s, this opens up Goa's links to the world through the oceans, more particularly, yeah. And what happens is that it is at this time, it appears, that the Bijapuris introduce the customs house, right? The Mandobi as an institution emerges during this time, right? And over time, this fiscal administrative structure of the Vijayanagaras, the Kirinaikas, and the Bijapuris gets augmented further once the Straddles India is slowly again established, right? So for me, sometimes 1517 is a much more important date than 1510 because the Fazenda Real was established there. Earlier, it was the Feitoria that looked after the financial affairs. So over time, slowly, the Fazenda Real introduces layers upon layers of fiscal administrative structures. So you have the Kamara, for instance. Each province has the Kamara or the municipality, which and the Fazenda Real also controls and regulates even the villages in areas, Pradesh and Sunset, right? So more layers add up to it, right? And so basically it is kind of this moment that comes after clubbing together a few centuries of history, and the Fazenda Real is, I think, at the forefront of taking Goa into the world, in a sense, right? It provides that sort of local as well as the transoceanic structures that are necessary for Goa to interact with this slowly and increasingly globalizing world, right? So how do we think about this? So there are these two streams of history of human movement. Why do I think that this explains the past reality better than any other model? And part of the reason why is this 1997 essay by one of the most leading historians of the Portuguese Empire, of South Asia, so on and so forth. And in this essay, Sanjay Subramanian argued for a methodological shift, right? And also it became as a manifesto, so I think 25 years later we still read it to see like how do we do global history, you know? Are we on the right track? Like what can be done with this method? So basically what he said was that the world was connected, right? And one had to look at these different regions as essentially connected, right? And so then the ideas of connected histories comes into like academic discourse. It seems to be a better term than using globalization, because that has like this not less than savory kind of connotations at times. So this kind of term seems to work better for historians, right? And I think it does. I like it, yeah. And it is because of these connected history that through time, but also in space. So you have something, let's say, from the 1200s or the 1100s that influence world history, but also, let's say, from the 1500s, you have at the same time different regions coming into contact with each other. It is these, like the horizontal line in time, the vertical line in time and the horizontal line in space that comes together. And there's a point where I think Goa becomes one of the important centers of these connected histories, because it receives a lot of influences from all over, not necessarily for the good, of course, but it does. And it becomes a factory for producing new forms of text, illustrations, and a visual vocabulary. Right? So it's not necessarily the kind of images that I'm going to show you that I think are unique to this context, but text, different kinds of documents are also, I think, produced at this time, but perhaps maybe another lecture some other time. Yeah, maybe. So this is why I believe that Goa became a home for the visual and artistic and cultural vocabulary. And so this visual culture came about through an interesting process, through a process that I find quite fascinating, of cross-cultural collaboration, right? And this is one point that I want to stress, and I try to come back to it over and over again. Think of it as a model of the story, perhaps, you know, just a model show you nice pictures over here, but there is some kind of moral of the story at the end. So this is one point that I'm going to come back to as much as I can. And to do this, I am going to talk about 3 collections. The first one is by far my favorite, and I think this was the first collection as an undergrad, as a graduate student that I was introduced to by chance, I believe. And so that love affair has continued, and it will continue for many, many years, I'm sure. That is the Codex Casanatians. The second one is the text. It has a longer title, and I'll get to it, but it's simply called Libro, the book by Antonio Bucaro. The text of it is provided by Antonio Bucaro, a New Christian who was one of the top civil servants at that time. But the illustrations, the maps are credited to Pedro Pajedo de Rezende, who was the secretary to the Viceroy at that time. This was in 1635, and the last one, Suma de Arbores, in 1602 by Manuel Moutinho de Heredia. What I would like to do in each of this collection is, first, with the Codex Casanatians, I would talk about people. It does depict other things, but I just want to talk about just the people, right? And in the second one, I want to talk about how space was represented, how space was conceptualized, because again, it's a new thing, right? It's not necessarily something that people are familiar with, like this opening up of the global space, especially the oceanic space, right? And the third one, I want to talk about a little bit about how these kind of illustrations were essentially done for medicinal purposes, like to generate medical knowledge. But I'm also trying to think about it as foodstuffs, because it might be obvious, but people needed to eat, and so that I think so was also a concern, right? It's not just to have stuff to cure your diseases, but food as well, right? And think about it, like if you think about people and the places and food to eat or medicine, it suggests that, or we can think of it as life itself or the lived reality back in the day. So if you want to think about or if you want to understand the lived reality, I think these kind of sources help us in having a mental picture. So we don't have to necessarily imagine everything ourselves, but can engage with what was produced in that time, right? So the first, the Codex Casanathense. So the frustrating bit about the Codex is that nobody knows who painted it, right? And nobody knows who commissioned it. Like, who's the patron, who's the painter, we don't know. There are only guesses, and I'm just going to present two guesses here. One is Martin Afonso de Souza, who was the governor from 1542 to 1545, and the other one is Garcia de Horta, the famous doctor, botanist, in whose honor the garden in the middle of Panjim is named. So it seems that he might have also commissioned it, and one can understand why, because he was the author of that very famous book on the medicines and plants of India, published in Goa, one of the first books to be published in 1563, if I'm not mistaken. So we don't know, right? And therefore we also don't know when exactly this collection of 76 watercolors were painted, right? So then the scholars suggest, right now they sort of suggest a very broad range from about 1550s to 1580s. I'm more inclined to believe that the latter date might be more plausible, because I don't think the earlier date there were these conditions that would, let's say, foster patronage in Goa, right? So I don't think the city was as developed as it was by the end of the 16th century. And so over the centuries, this album changed several hands until it reached those of an Italian cardinal, Girolamo Casanata, who gave all his books and collections to the Dominicans in 1700 in Rome. And today it's the Casanathense Library is a public institution run by the Italian government. So this is where it is housed right now. And so now we'll look at some images from this collection. I just want you to absorb them, enjoy them. No need to worry about too much about what they mean. So just have fun with it. And this is the depiction of the King of Campbell just before he goes just before he attacks Dew. So it talks about an earlier time, about 1530s or 1540s, and it's quite rich in how it depicts various things. And one of the interesting thing about this collection is the prominence of women in this collection. So you can see, I believe it's a falconer maybe who is like facing the king, perhaps indicating that it's his wife. We don't know. So that's how they depicted this scene. What I want to really highlight is how much the economic activity was part of the collection. So you have here Labradores to Reino de Cambaya, over here. So you have this. Somebody else supplied the caption, so it's not supplied by the one who painted it. So you have here workers sowing the field. And this is the scene of Banya women who are merchants, very rich from the kingdom of Kandy. They're classified as Gentiles over here, right? And this is also my favorite because this shows Labradores Canarinhos que semeiam arroz e trigo. So what it means is worker. Canarinhos was like a general term utilized for people in Goa and the Canada. So we don't know exactly if it is seen from Goa or not, but so Canary workers or farm workers that sow rice and wheat. So I'm not sure if wheat was grown in these parts, but that's what it says. But it does show like how the process worked, right? And the last one is irons, blacksmiths. Again, they're shown working their trade, and then it shows like what kind of tools that they were making, and this is a cartoon. Thanks to Hansel who introduced me to it, which is here. I could recognize this, and the penny dropped one day, and I was like, this is good. This is good for me. So this is how these are some of the images that you can see here. What I want to also talk about in relation to these images, I said I want to talk about people over here, is a theory that the Dutch historian Ernst van den Burgat proposes for these images. But he did not develop this theory by studying only these images. The first time he did this, he studied Jan Huygens van Schotten's illustrations that were appended to his itinerary, right? And so what Van den Burgat says about these couples, these men and women pairs or ethnographic couples, is that this one was a very European way of doing ethnography. Two, it was a way to categorize peoples and or groups of people or cultures on a scale of stability and corruption, like on a high to a low scale. Now the reference was European culture, but it wasn't a fixed scale. You observed what the people did and what kind of political and economic and cultural forms that they had, and that's how you judge them, right? Alternatively, if the European found that that his own culture was not as good as somebody else's, then he could also emulate those non-European cultural forms, right? So there's a different way of relating to the self and the other, right? And this is what he proposes, right? So very briefly, what he suggests is that the structure of the household, man, woman, husband, wife, technological advances that is in the way, what kind of weapons or tools that they use suggested, their place in that particular scale, and or the use of metallic currency, the provenance, the existence of markets, how advanced they were, and so on. So what that reading suggests is that that these non-European cultures that the Europeans observed could either be better, worse, or at par with European norms. So there was this sort of constant thinking and rethinking about your own culture and your own position in the world. So that's something that that he suggests. Now, I don't think this might necessarily be the best way to read such images, because one, I don't think that these were solely a creation of Europeans. It's not a European gaze completely, right? So I have my doubts about that, and I think that there isn't this sort of need to negatively portray something, right? And so there seems to be a reification of the laboring groups, the Einsteins or agrarian workers or those who transport goods on pack animals, for instance, right? So, but the reason why I mentioned this work is because I think he's the only scholar who's ever tried to make sense of these kind of images, right? He's tried to understand the code, he's tried to crack the code. And I think that's why it deserves attention, and that's why I think I come back to it every now and then. And so these are the kind of images that you see, right? So the legend, the caption reads, people who are called Naitias, I think they're Nawaitis, because the next word is Moorish or Moors. So over here they are depicting Nawaiti Muslims as a household. The next one is Malabari Jews, Judaish Malabarish. And it's very interesting because these are the kind of Jewish population in Malabar that are called the black Jews, right? They were essentially traders and migrants from Yemen or Arabia, right? And the white Jews were the migrants from Iberia, or the new Christians who fled the post-convergence and the Inquisition in Portugal, right? So, and it's very interesting that they're shown as warriors, but also their profession is shown, or perhaps the source of their income probably. And finally, I want to, this is it says Malabari Christians who make good adventurers from South Tome. So they are like these traders, but also local Christians. So these are the kinds of depictions that you get of people. So essentially, it's like a man and a woman, and with some defining character, right? So I want to move to the second collection, but before that, I want you to just think about how these rocks are painted, because this is from the Casamaten's collection, and this is from Rezende's libro, right? So many scholars have pointed out that this is that the style is very similar, right? And I think this is what we need to think about a little more. There is a similarity in these painting styles, although they might be separated by many decades, almost maybe half a century or more, right? So as far as the libro is concerned, there is no disagreement about its authorship, and there is no uncertainty about its date. It was done in 1635. Antonio Bocao supplied the text, one of the most detailed texts and one of the really important sources for the history of the Portuguese Empire, especially in India. And I haven't read a more detailed text than Antonio Bocao's text, which is just simply fantastic, right? And the illustrations of the maps were done by Pedro Alberto de Rezende, who was, as I said, the secretary to the Viceroy. So the text was completed in 1635, but it is also part of a context, right? And the context goes back to 1580s when the crown of Portugal went to the Philippine monarchy. And at this point, the Philips of Spain and Portugal were really interested in reforming, in bringing about financial reforms in the Estado, especially in the Estado, because they saw that the things were not really working very well. And so Bocao's report was the second one The first one was commissioned, was submitted in 1582, and that's simply called, I just read the English translation, the book of the cities and fortresses that the Portuguese crown has in the parts of India and of the captaincies and other ranks that are there in it, and its importance. So it basically describes all the institutions, all the administrative structures that were there, that had developed until the 1580s. And then the tone is always like, but what could be done to like make things better, right? And so even Bocaro's report, it has that same tone about what could the king do to make things better. And it's done very politely. Nobody can order the king to do this, do that. So it's done very politely. You can miss it, but you have to be very, very careful about that tone. So then you get it, right? So there was this obsession with financial reform. Like whatever they did, they just wanted to make things right. And so then the question is, especially for us, who was Hezem, right? He, not much is known about his life, except that in 1629, he lands in Goa as the secretary to the viceroy, and 6 years later he produced a collection or an album of about 48 Portuguese fortresses or possessions or cities or settlements, and later in his career he also produced his own text, his own libro, as it were, right? Detailing or giving information about what was there in India. So Hezemde is a scribe, is a secretary, right? And a new work is coming out on scribal cultures, and it's a research that is just happening right now. And so one of the things that this research stresses is that like other scribes and secretaries, Hezemde must have spent most of his days and most of his evenings copying out letters or drafting new letters on the instructions of the viceroy, right? And like other functionaries, including the viceroy, he may have taken most of these papers with him. So even the state papers were kind of considered as personal property, and so that's another reason why we don't have a lot of biographical information about many of these people, because they took their papers with them. Right? And so being in this sort of new space, globalizing, the oceans are important, Hezemde, I'm sure, had to think of the sea as well as the land, right? Because that's the kind of interplay that you have in these illustrations, right? And I think that it speaks to the fact that now the oceans were really fundamental to everyone's life. That there was no one's life that was not influenced by the ocean, right? So this is what we're really looking at a new way of living, right? And it's slowly building up. So I'm going to show a few images. And this is the mound, and you can see the fortification, the architecture, the settlements, and then some vegetation as well. And other illustration is much more detailed about regarding the vegetation or the trees and the plants and what surrounds it. This is Basai. So these are coconut trees. So I think it suggests that there were these orchards near the fort, and then people lived there. So these are some of the houses. You can see the thatched roof over here. You can see a small well. So it's quite detailed as far as what it illustrates. Right? It's quite detailed. Like there's a cannon here. Of course, it's not realistic as such. Like that, I'm sure there were more cannons. I'm sure there were more wells. But it does give us a sense of what it was like back in the day. This is Chawl. Now it's in Raigad, Raven. I think that's the, and this is the Konlai Fort. And this is Ilya Shinibades. So around here, you have rice fields over here. And then you have some coconut orchards over here, some architecture, some churches, chapels, forts, islands, and so forth. So what do we see in these images, right? One of the ways I think I could make sense of this was by what other historians have said about the Portuguese Empire, and two of these historians, Luis Menezes and Sanjay Subramanian, used the phrase that the Portuguese Empire was a network of coastal fortresses. This is essentially from the 16th and 17th century, right? And so what you see here is what you see as in the depicting is essentially that network of these fortresses, and the importance of these possessions, these fortresses, comes out in the text that Bocaro wrote. So I'm going to talk about one word, fazenda, in order to explain why these fortresses were important, right? So what does the term fazenda mean? Now there's a dictionary term which I have no problem with, but in practice generally this is something more that always is part of the dictionary term, right? And so the trick here is to think about how Antonio Bocaro deploys it, right? So in its bare bones, fazenda means farms, farming, trade, revenue, or wealth, right? Largely, how it is deployed in the text is to suggest wealth generated by the cultivation of the soil. So the agrarian production is very important when he deploys the word fazenda. Right? So for instance, the transport and trade of say rice, coconuts, or alcohol was classed as fazenda in Bocaro's text. The royal treasury, as I mentioned earlier, was called fazenda real, right? And the control of the royal treasury was called the bureau of the fazenda, for instance. Fazenda also meant the rent that the state collected from the agrarian communities, right? So thus the status of the crown's riches, or the crown's position, the financial position, depended on the efficiency of the system that the fazenda real controlled, the efficiency of or the success of the agrarian production. So in addition to providing defense and protection, these forts were essentially marketplaces, right? So goods were brought, they were sold, customs paid, or dispatched to another location, right? And both these buyers and sellers needed these forts, and most of them were not Europeans. So these forts emerged as these places of great commerce, right? And the contrast that Bocaro gives to fazenda is viagens, which simply means journeys or voyages, right? But what he suggests is that the exchange of goods, the economic relationship, in that very neoliberal sense, was something that he separated, right? And he separated as oceanic journeys or transport of goods. Fazenda had this close connection with the soil. So you needed to farm the land to produce the commodities that essentially were classed by him as fazenda. And I think this is what the illustrations also point out, right? Because you had to look at them, or they were intended to be looked at simultaneously with the text. So what kind of fazendas I think are most important over here? I think the coconut orchards, something like this. Obviously there were more than that, but it's depicted as such. Like there's the orchard, and then there are some houses, perhaps the people who worked in the orchards or who took care of it, who lived here, the thatch roofed houses, and the rice fields, right? Large part of it was controlled and regulated by the commodities, right? So these are the two types, and also I think they were sensitive to the fact that they needed the riverine ways, they needed the ocean. So they were very they took care to depict these as well.
How accurate is the depiction of the river and the river and the ocean?
Maybe I'll come to it a little later. Yeah. So that was Mangalore, and this is Basrur, close to it. One of the most important rice producing centers, because Goa, the city of Goa always had a shortage, and Basrur was the place where armadas were sent to procure it, or the city of Goa raised their own funds to send ships to procure it. This is Cochin. And so I'm going to move to the third one, and I want to do this because Manuel Godinho de Heredia, before he painted those watercolors about the plants, he was a serious map maker. So he saw himself as a map maker, and so you see here on your right is a plan of Mombasa, much more accurate than on the left. This was done in 1610. The original lies in Biblioteca Nacional Rio de Janeiro. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because a lot of the illustrations, or a few of the illustrations in Rezende's collection drew from Heredia's work. And I'm grateful to Jogi Santos, who pointed this out to me. He said, you need to look at the other manuscript as well. So it's through his goodness that I found this manuscript as well. So this is the first page of Heredia's album, right? And Heredia, in contrast to Rezende, is better known and more of a colorful character. He was born in Malacca in 1563 to a Portuguese father and a Malay mother. Sometimes he is considered to be an adventurer of the picaresque type, like he's having these adventures, can't be trusted but oddly pleasing as a hero. And other times he's considered to be a cultural intermediate, a go-between, as it were. Frankly, I'm inclined to the latter view, and I'll talk about it in some detail. So he landed in Goa for higher studies at the St. Paul's College. Very soon he was thrown out for some mischievous behavior. I don't know what exactly, but something that needs you to be thrown out, right? But nonetheless, in the time that he was here, he produced this album of essentially materia medica, right? This was called Sumada Plantas da India Intraganges. Quite exaggerated, like all the plants, all the trees and plants of India below the Ganga. That's what the title essentially means, right? This manuscript, for some reason, is found in Belgium, in the Maupentine Abbey, which is where it is right now. The interesting thing about Heredia is that he was one of the earliest to paint botanical subjects. You might have heard of the Hortus Indicus Malabaricus, but that's like in 1678. It's much more detailed. It's like 12 volumes. It's much more advanced, but Heredia is someone who does that kind of work early, right? And the Hortus later becomes the basis for the development of scientific botany or the systematic botany, because Carl Linné uses the Hortus Indicus Malabaricus when he is working on devising a system to classify the plants of the world. So why was Heredia or anybody else interested in such in such plants, in such flora. Essentially, why were they thinking of these kind of plants as having medicinal value? Why were they interested in the medicinal value? One answer, the obvious one, is because they wanted to preserve their health, right? And we know that the mortality rate of Europeans in the tropics was very, very high. And the other, and relating to this reason, also the fact that there was this sort of philosophical understanding that somehow the European body is not suited for the tropics. So you need to do something. You need to adjust somehow to the tropics, right? However, there might not necessarily be a direct relationship between like interest in plants or interest in the knowledge of plants and preservation of health. And the argument over here is that why do they need to preserve their health is because they want to preserve their empire, right? Because dead men don't rule clearly. So again, I don't necessarily think that this might be a direct relationship between this kind of text and empire, because for instance, in the case of Van Reda and Hendrik Adriaan van Reda, who was the Dutch commander in Cochin, was the VOC commander in Cochin, he embarked on this project because his reason was very simple. We don't need to spend all that money to ship medicines from the Netherlands. We can just emulate the locals and do as they do, right? And also in the case of Goa, you see a lot of Europeans trusting their health in the hands of local doctors. So they didn't have that kind of need to generate or collect a lot of medicinal knowledge, right? So these are two things why I don't necessarily think that medicinal text, knowledge, and empire kind of go together always. So what I want to do with this is test your knowledge a little bit, your opening knowledge, if I may, because I can't do all the talking, right? Can everybody read the yeah? Okay. So Arabia used a lot of company words, and this is why I was very interested in this text. As a researcher, I'm not necessarily interested in so many plants, but this is why I got like really interested, because this was a very pleasant surprise for me. One fine day in Washington DC, fine morning, just opened this text and I was like, oh, what's happening here? So any guesses? What's this? Yeah, okay, this is jackfruit, of course. About this? Okay, good. Good, wow. A plus. Tamil, okay. Maybe, fair enough. Even I got that for the first time. I had to look this up. I don't know what this is.
If you expand it, maybe it will help you.
I can only supply the Latin word, and I don't know how to pronounce this. It's Viburnum fetidum? No idea. Yeah, but apparently this is a Konkani word. Yeah, there's a reference to Delgado Sebastian Dolphin in the footnotes, and what he says about it is one of his dictionaries. How about this? You don't need to read it. Yeah. This is of course ginger. This is Portuguese word, but quite spelling is weird. Rice and finger with it. Natsini. Yeah? And this is a word that is always used. Not others, but for Anha's class. There is no Portuguese word ever used in the documentation. Everybody uses bath if they want to be referred to as unhusked paddy. Indigo, right? Neem or indigo, ani. Yeah, the plant, the leaf which, Yes, exactly. Okay, good. You've done well, I'm happy. So this is what it is. I don't want to talk much about it because I also don't know much about this particular text, and there's very little that you can, there's very little of text that accompanies it, so you need to take a little more, perhaps in some other sources to kind of say something more about it. So that brings me to a very important point, is early modern authorship, right? Notice how I qualify authorship with early modern. I want to let you know that authorship was not understood the same way as it was from the 19th century, right? What we think of authorship was essentially a collaboration between different kinds of people, right? And the best way to understand this process is by the historian of science, Kapil Raj, who is based in Paris. In his book, Relocating Modern Science, he makes the suggestion that almost every early modern text is a co-construction, right? Just to simplify it, what it means is that many people contributed. The Europeans were the ones who put their names on it, but the nameless ones, or those behind the scenes, were equally important. And you can learn about them if you look hard enough, if you can read between the lines, right? So that's what he says, read between the lines, right, essentially, because every early modern text is a co-construction. And so I want to make 4 points about this co-constructed nature as such, right? And the first one pertains to the ethnographic subject. So what you have on the left is Van Linschotten's illustration, the illustration that were appended to this published book. So this is essentially a copper engraving. And the other one is, of course, most beloved, Codex Cassantense. Right? So the manner of portraying these people, these couples, so to speak, was of course a very European convention. However, if you look at how things were done in Europe and how things were done here, there is a remarkable difference. Right? This is more Renaissance. There's more realism there, so to speak. The other one, it doesn't, right? And so that what it suggests is basically there was somebody else who was not a European who did this, right? And then the conjecture is, as far as recent historiographic studies are concerned, there was somebody from the Bijapuri Group who migrated here for work, and he was asked to do these paintings, right? So that's one. Point one is that if you compare, you do see the hand of somebody else who was never named, who never signed his name, but who seems to be there, who's there, right? Point number two, the use of pink. And so these are Bijapuri miniatures. So you have Hawking scene, and then you have this very interesting painting of all the Bijapuri rulers. This was done in the 1680s when there was a crisis, there was a political crisis, and so they wanted to suggest that this was the glory of the Bijapuri kingdom, right? So But what is important here today is the use of pink to depict landscapes, or just the use of pink. So I here draw on a very interesting study done by Seema Titalic in 2018 at the University of Evora, who did some X-ray analysis of Hezende's illustrations, and she suggests that there were essentially seven pigments used, right? Red made from cinnamon, which is a mineral. Black could not be identified because there is not enough black paint used in those illustrations. White made from lead. Yellow made from yellow ochre. Blue possibly from indigo. Green from copper oxide, and dark pink from cochineal, which was a dye that was brought from Mexico. I'll just focus on the pink, and if you can remember, I should have put a picture of it, but then let's go back. So the pink in the fortification, right, over here. Over here, the use of pink for depicting essentially buildings of laterite stone. Now we are kind of quite familiar with red as the color for laterite stone, right? And over here I'm thinking of Paulo Varela, which is very advocated title, whitewash red stone, right? So we are aware, we associated laterite stone with red, but it seems that the convention to depict fortresses in Mughal, Rajput, Sultanate, Deccan Sultanate miniatures was in fact pink and largely made from cochineal, right? So what does this suggest? That what does the use of pink for fortification suggest? One, it suggests that somebody knew the convention. Somebody had a knowledge of what that convention was in South Asia. I don't think they could have learned that just a few years after arrival in India. He needed to have like Rajput paintings, Mughal miniatures, and that seems not possible to have that sort of at ready disposal, right? So there was again somebody else, right? Now over here we have to be cautious because, as other scholars suggest, I think Hezende did the paintings. However, he may have gotten help to make those pigments from somebody else. So the study of the X-ray analysis of the pigments, though by no means conclusive, suggests that he may have had the assistance of somebody else in producing these illustrations. Right? So that's point 2. The third point, the vanishing point, or foreshortening. As a technique, it was developed in Renaissance Italy, and it came to India and it was kind of adopted quite readily in the Mughal court, not anywhere else. So again, if you look at the illustration of the fortresses, and somebody asked me how accurate is it. So you see what is happening is that there is an absence of foreshortening. So you have like a 3-dimensional space being depicted on a 2-dimensional plane, and you have a large area that you need to depict. So on one hand, the landscape is seen from a point above, but on the other hand, there are these two perspectives, one from the above, one from the front. And so I think that's essentially was done again by painters who were not necessarily knew the principles very well of foreshortening, but also to kind of manage depicting so many different things on a two-dimensional space, right? And then some studies have talked about the career of foreshortening in the Mughal atelier, And one of the recent studies, not so recent, but done in like 2002, and this was the presidential address at the 63rd session of the Indian History Congress, given by the very well-known art historian of the Mughal Empire, S.P. Verma, where he basically argues that although foreshortening was quite known, but the artist did not know the principles and the math behind it. So you see it being applied, and this is the example that he gives. You see it being applied, but it's not necessarily done very well. It's not as great as, say, Quattrocento Florence, the 15th century Florence, Florentine works, for instance, right? So that's point number 3. Point number 4, composition. So, how is information arranged in these artworks? What's the convention here? I don't have any work to base myself on, but it just seems that you can draw horizontal lines, and most of the information is supplied as horizontal lines. So this is from the Upper Nama, and this is from what we've been talking about. So you have the scene of a fortress. So here you have settlements shown as in horizontal bands, and I think part of the reason is because this was an album which was folded. You can see the fold here, and so I think the artist wants the eye to move in this direction, like you're reading a text, right? And so all the information you're getting one by one, right? And so over here, this is from the Codex Casanatens. It's the scene of a marriage, and so here again the couple over here, the other guests, and so on. So you have this again, I think arranged in horizontal bands. This again, I think the most detailed one in Bokharo's collection is the map of Sunset, which was on the cover, right? And so you can see rice fields over here. Let me try to magnify it. So you can see rice fields over here. You can see some settlements, some churches, a temple over here, coconut orchards, some fortifications, so on and so forth, right? So, and this is a very interesting scene over here. This is a scene of a money changer, Saraf, in Cambay. So you see here people rushing towards. They had a lot of money, but they didn't have the right coin. So they wanted the right coin. So you have Firangis, you have locals, you have interestingly a woman here who seems to be stamping on everybody to get to there first. But again, the point is that it's arranged. Information is arranged in horizontal bands, and I think this is also part of a convention that was pan South Asia, right? Oops. So I'm almost done. So why does this matter? Why should we care, right? For one, I think this is art. This is great art, and that's why we should care. But relating to that sentiment, I think this art teaches us something. And one of the things that it teaches us, and we can think about it by focusing on authorship, is a question that a seemingly open and shut question as far as authorship is concerned is not so, right? These paintings force us to consider what we cannot see, right? And thereby, I think it forces us to think about a history not just as a history of kings and queens and dynasties, but also of those men and women who labored, who rarely leave places, who are rarely written about in the archives, but who are as important, if not more, important historical actors or agents as kings and queens. And art, I think, forces us to make this visible, that was until now invisible, right? And this kind of calls for some out-of-the-box thinking, and what better way to do this than to meditate on the art, the artist, the brush strokes, and the pigments. So with this, I'll close. Thank you so much for the patient listening. It's so good to see so many friends in the audience also. Thank you so much for showing up. I can take some, I look forward to your comments. Perhaps if there are questions, I could address them. Yeah.
All of you for being here for this